It's crazy because I never thought this is why they had brought me to the police station. I had no clue why, but I thought at worst it was a ticket. When they told me that I'd been charged with capital murder, it just floored me because that was the furthest thing from my mind.
Hi, welcome to this 10th episode of Death Row Stories. First of all, a huge welcome to all the new YouTube subscribers. You're a lot to subscribe just after my latest video. It's amazing to see that so many of you find it impactful enough to subscribe. Thank you. If I had one other story to recommend to explore on my channel, it would be my interview with Pamela Perio. I won't give away too much, but trust me, her journey is truly remarkable and worth hearing. Today we'll start exploring the story of Anthony Graves. I met him when I was in Houston in December. I think Texans call this season winter because they sometimes have to wear socks. Never mind. Anthony is the author of Infinite Hope, a book that captures a part of his incredible life. Once again, I don't want to spoil too much too soon, but believe me, his story demands to be told. So let's dive in. We'll need several parts to explore his incredible path. Today we'll start with the beginning.
My name is Anthony Graves. Through my foundation, I created the Peer Navigator Project, which trains formerly incarcerated men and women how to work alongside criminal defense attorneys to mentor their clients and their family members while they're dealing with the criminal justice system. My extensive experience dealing with the death penalty has allowed me to be creative in this space and kind of give people that are behind those bars what I think they need, which is peer navigator support.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for agreeing to be interviewed by Death Row Stories. Yes. Your story and your work today are incredible, and I would like to dive into it. You were born in 1965 and grew up in Brenham, little Texas rural town between Austin and Houston. You're the eldest of 5 siblings of an African-American family. Can you tell us about your parents and who raised you?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, my parents were typical teenage parents when they had me, right? I was raised by my father and my mother were married, but my father worked for the railroad and he spent most of his time working. My mother also worked, but she did most of the raising, right? But because she worked a lot and my dad was always gone, I kind of parented my siblings because I was the oldest. We lived in what we call the projects, where mostly kids were dealing with single parent homes. The fathers were not in our homes. We were all being raised by our mothers, right? But we were all a community. And we didn't understand poverty because we felt like we were rich kids, but because we had each other. I love sports. I excelled in sports. I played basketball, baseball, football, ran track. I was well liked growing up. Yeah, so that's kind of with my childhood. It was a normal childhood.
You had your first son at 15.
Yeah.
And he was born with sickle cell anemia.
Yes.
You were often at the hospital with him. How did you deal with that? Because you were still in high school.
Yes.
And had to go to the hospital and take care of your son.
Well, this was a different era, right? My son was born in 1980. Yes, in 1980. So parenting was a little different. You're a little bit more responsible for parenting back then. So when my son was born, even though I was young, I still had to step up. I had the support of my mother and my siblings and everything, My son was raised by all of us, I like to say, because my mother was there hands-on, I was hands-on, my siblings were hands-on, her parents, as you know, so my son had a lot of support growing up, but nevertheless, I did play my role as his father at an early age. And when we discovered he had sickle cell anemia and he would have to go into the hospital to have blood transfusions, it was my responsibility to be there to encourage my son. No matter what my age was, this was my son. And so I took that role on because, you know, my understanding of what a dad was and what should be was from what my dad wasn't for me. And so that taught me a lot about how to parent my child. And so I knew it was very important for me to be there for him.
A couple of years later, you had 2 other children, and by the age of 20, you had 3 sons. How did that happen? It was not unusual where you were living, and what was your relationship with their mothers?
He said, how did it happen? It's called the Big Bang Theory. But, I mean, you know, yeah, it's just that era. I was young. I was, you know, I was the man of the house at an early age because, as I say, my father was always out. And, you know, life just happened. And, you know, when a child is born, everyone comes together and support it. And that was the era then.
After high school, what work did you do?
So after high school, I went to work. And I played sports for the company that I worked for. I was just your typical era person, man, that worked. I had children. I lived a normal life.
You struggled financially, though.
I mean, I didn't struggle no more than the next person. You know, I had a job. It wasn't a high-paying job, but I worked, you know. I didn't do bad. I wasn't in the streets, you know. I don't want to paint this picture that I was some sort of poor soul. No, I made a okay living.
But you had to also to continue to take care of your sons, especially your eldest one, go to the hospital. At some point, you couldn't pay your car anymore. So that's why I was saying you struggled a little bit financially.
So what had happened is I made a choice. I either could pay to go and support my son or pay my car note at that time. And I chose to take the money because my son was in the hospital and I traveled with that money to stay with my son. And so they took my car and I ended up having to get it back like a month later when I got paid again. But it was a choice I had to make and it wasn't a hard choice. I wanted to be there for my son and it took my money to do that, so.
In 1987, at the age of 22, for the first time, you will see how unfair the justice system can be. Can you tell us what happened?
Oh, in 1987, yeah, they had what was called a drug bust. And a lot of us kids smoked marijuana back then. They used that against us. They arrested us, gave us outrageous charges. I ended up being put a 10-year probation for smoking marijuana. Just, you know, it was my first time ever being in any type of trouble. And it was unjust. We were just a bunch of kids, black kids in the project. And, you know, our comfort was smoking marijuana when we could. And so they changed our lives back then. They put us all on probation and it was the same prosecutor that later on did this, that I had this encounter with, you know, the same prosecutor.
Because you had to tell that you had sold more than marijuana to get out of it, no? They forced you, right?
Yeah, I had a charge for I sold $20 worth of marijuana. But I've never been in trouble in my life. Well, $40 worth of marijuana. But they told me that if I pled guilty to selling drugs, that I could get out in 6 months. But if I didn't, I would have to go for 15 years. So I lied on myself, which in hindsight was probably the best thing for me moving forward, based on what happened to me and what made me realize I needed to stand up for the truth. No longer would I just appease another man just for his career. The truth is what I was going to stand on, and so I think that prepared me for my next chapter.
So your next chapter started in August 1992 on the 18th That night, you spent a night with your girlfriend, which, by the way, had already a boyfriend.
And you read my book. Yeah.
And this will be important later, right?
Yes.
And this night you saw a lot of people. You were
Yes.
not just with her.
Yes.
Can you tell us real quickly about this night, what you did?
Yeah, so this particular night, it was a Sunday night. It was it was a Saturday night. And my girlfriend and I had stayed at my mother's apartment. Matter of fact, we made a pallet in the front room. And we hung out there, me and my girlfriend, my sister, my brother. We were all just up talking and hanging out. And then later on that night, my girlfriend and I, well, my lady friend and I, we went to sleep in the front room. My brother was in one room, and my other sister was in another room. And it was just a typical night, nothing out of the ordinary. And then woke up the next morning, and my sister woke us up and told us about something that happened up in another town. Yeah.
Yeah, another town which was 20 minutes from your house. Can you tell
Yes.
us what happened that night?
Yeah, that night an entire family was murdered. They were shot, stabbed, bludgeoned to death. Gasoline was poured all over their bodies. House was burned down. And it was a family of 6 children it was 4 children from ages under 10, a teenage daughter that was 16, and a grandmother that was 45. And it was like something that had never happened like that in this small town, because it was a very small town. And so it changed a lot of lives.
It was the Davis family.
Yes.
And the Texas Rangers went to the funeral.
Yes.
And someone appeared suspicious, Robert Carter, who
Yes.
was the father of one of the children. How was he and why was he suspicious?
When Mr. Carter showed up at the funeral, he had bandages and gauze wrapped around his head and on his arm and his hand. And to any other person, it would look like this young man had been in a fire or something, right? And so he immediately became a person of interest to the Texas Rangers that was there. And that started that whole thing.
And what was your relationship with this
I didn't
Robert?
have a relationship with him. He was married to a cousin of mine that I grew up with, but I didn't even know they were married. I knew at the time that they had married, but I didn't know when they had gotten married. I didn't have no relationship with him, We were grown people at that time, even though that was my cousin. I hadn't been around her for a while. And I think the only reason he knew who I was or knew of my name is because he was married to my cousin. And obviously she spoke up her family tree, but he and I never had a relationship. So I didn't really know him.
5 days after the murders, the police comes to your house, puts handcuffs on you, and they take you to the police station. And what does a Texas Ranger tell you?
Well, yeah, when they take me to the police station, they take me into the booking room, and they ask me to take everything out of my pockets and have a seat. And I'm sitting there, and police officers are walking in and out, and nobody's saying anything to me. So I started asking the officers, like, can somebody tell me why I'm here? Finally, the Texas Rangers come in with a magistrate, and they asked me to stand up. And when I did, they started reading me my rights, telling me that I had been accused of, I was being charged with capital murder. It's crazy, because I never thought this is why they had brought me to the police station. I had no clue why, but I thought at worst it was a ticket that I hadn't paid or something. I didn't realize, I didn't know, but I knew I hadn't had a ticket. So I didn't know where we was going, but when they told me that I'd been charged with capital murder, it just floored me, because that was the furthest thing from my mind.
So they tell you that Robert Carter said he did that with you, right?
Initially, they didn't tell me who, right? They just accused me of. Then they took me in, they started interrogating me, and they were telling me that Robert had told them. They wasn't telling me the last name, but I didn't know who Robert was. And I kept asking them, Robert who? Robert who? And finally, they filled in the blank and told me Robert Carter. And I trying to think, who is Robert Carter? And it dawned on me that this the guy that married my cousin? And I was like, he don't know me. But, you know, it didn't matter at that time.
So you keep telling the Texas Rangers you don't know this guy, and what do they offer you to?
Well, they don't offer me, I offer them, right? I told them that, you know, I would take a lie detector test for them if, because I didn't have nothing to hide. I'd take a truth serum test for them, or whatever test they wanted me to take, I would take for them. And so I surprised them when I said that, and they were like, you would take a lie detector test? I said, yes, sir, I'd take any test you want me to take. And so I ended up taking a lie detector test hours later. I always tell people that, particular attorneys, don't ever let your client take a lie detector test. They're called lie detector tests for a reason, because they can lie on you, okay? And you don't know how to read a lie detector test. They can tell you whatever they want to tell you. You don't know the results of them. And so because I didn't know the results of a test, I couldn't read the test. I'm just telling you the truth, and then they told me that I failed the test. And then after that, they start playing all kind of good cop, bad cop games with me. So I would tell anyone listening to this documentary, if you find yourself in a situation where you need an attorney and they're asking you to take a lie detector test, don't do it. That's the reason why it's not admissible in court. It's a scare tactic, that's all.
Do you think this lie detector test was real? Did it exist? Because it never appeared after that.
Well, we tried to get the results through legal proceedings. No one ever produced the results, okay? They made us jump through hoops to try to get the results, but they never produced the results. It was all a scare tactic. That's all. It was something to say, well, if I tell you you lied on yourself, then maybe you'll tell me something, but I couldn't lie on myself no matter what, so.
You were still hoping at this point to get out of there for an appointment with your girlfriend, right? The same evening.
I wanted to go home. I didn't have no business being in jail, you know, and I couldn't tell them anything. This crime happened in a whole nother town I didn't even go to. So I couldn't tell them anything, and I just want to go home, right? But that's just not the way it works.
So they pressure you all night. The next day, they take you to another jail. And who's in the cell just in front of you?
They interrogated me all night till about 3 o'clock in the morning. Afterwards, they took me to jail, right? Because they realized I wasn't gonna lie. So they took me to a jail. That night, they took me to a jail called Milam County. The following morning, they took me to another jail. And when they took me to this jail, they moved everybody around in the jail so that one cell would be open, which would be directly across from the guy that lied on me, which was Mr. Robert Carter. So after they moved everybody around, they got me and they brought me to that cell, right? And then from there, I look up and I see that this is the man that lied on, supposedly had lied on me, because he was still wrapped in gauze and things like that. So when he walked up to his door, I didn't know if he was crazy. I didn't know nothing, right? I don't know the man. But I asked him across from us, I said, hey man, do you believe I did a crime with you? And he just shook his head like this. I say, well, for my mother's sake and my children's sake, man, can you please tell these people the truth? And he just shook his head like that and he walked off. That was the only conversation I ever had with him.
That's incredible. A week after the murders, there is a grand jury proceeding. What is a grand jury, and why at this point you didn't have a lawyer?
A grand jury proceeding is where the community, they pick people from the community to sit on the jury to listen to what would be considered evidence to see whether an indictment is warranted against the person. Right, so they had these grand jury proceedings, and they would invite you to come and speak in front of the grand jury and tell your side of the story. Most of the time, you don't do things like that without an attorney, right? But for me, I was naive because I thought being innocent, it didn't matter. I didn't need an attorney to tell you that I'm innocent. And so that was my mindset. I was cooperating 110% with whatever they wanted because I was innocent. It didn't matter. So we went to these grand jury proceedings. They invited me up there to tell my story. They invited Mr. Carter up there. They invited a couple of my alibi witness, which was my girlfriend, and several other people, right? This is what they do to gather information. And then they decide whether the case proceeds to a trial or an indictment.
You testify, Carter testifies also, and when he comes back to his cell, you asked him what he said to the jury. And
I asked him if he told them the truth.
And what did
And
he say?
said, yeah, you should be going home. It didn't happen.
But he did.
I mean, he did tell them the truth, but they hid that from us. They turned around and then went after his wife and indicted his wife and charged her with capital murder and put her in jail for 2 months and then let her go. But then told him that he continued to tell the same story or they were gonna go back after his wife because there was no statute of limitation on capital murder. So that's how all of that played out behind the scenes.
Will he be indicted? I'm sure you guessed, but before he found out, something extraordinary happened. We'll explore that in the next part, and believe me, the story only gets crazier as time goes on. These stories deserve to be told, so if you haven't already, subscribe. It helps platforms like YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts to know that people are interested, and it will help them recommend it to more people. You can also drop a comment. Try to guess, for example, where I am today. I can help you telling you that more than 3 million people live in this area. See you soon.